From the author of Spinsterella, The Strange and Unusual Romance and Spellbound, A Darker Shade of Black comes the legendary Magic Children. Pick up the conclusions of the Spinsterella trilogy in paperback and e-readers this Halloween. A world without Marvel or DC Comics is something many of us can't imagine, but it's something that might actually become a reality sooner rather than later. In August, the comic book industry posted some of the worst sales numbers in the history of the medium. Many books that were once popular, like X-Men and Spider-Man, which used to post 500,000 sales in the late 1980s, are barely selling 50,000 units. And many comics that are on the DC side, like Superman, which used to sell 5 million comics back in the 50s, are barely selling 40,000 comics today. And worse these days, many comic shops aren't ordering comics. Due to the poor sales of many of these diversity characters and the SJW agenda at Marvel Comics, and the numerous reboots and relaunches related to DC's New 52, its Convergence and Rebirth, many comic fans just aren't buying comics these days because they're having a hard time relating to many of these characters at Marvel that replaced many of the popular characters, and many people are confused as related to DC's continuity. So a lot of fans that used to buy comics have left the medium, and there haven't been many new readers to replace them. So with many comic shops not being able to sell a lot of comics these days due to the lack of interest in comics, a lot of them are winding up becoming stuck with piles of inventory that they just can't move. And because they can't move that inventory, some shops are being forced to close because they aren't being able to sell comics the way they used to. I mean, I look at the big picture of this, and when I look at the big picture, it looks like it's almost like it's the last days of the big two, Marvel and DC. Now, while there are many comic fans out there going to the movies, they're just not buying comic books. And because they're not buying comic books, these comic book companies, like Marvel and DC, their parent companies, Disney and Warner Brothers, are eventually going to reach a point where they just can't keep putting money into the publishing divisions of Marvel and DC. Yes, these companies make billions of dollars on superheroes like Spider-Man, Captain America, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and the Hulk in licensing and merchandising, but their publication divisions have reached a point where they just keep taking losses. And because they keep taking losses, the publishing division is at the point where it's just not sustainable anymore. Back in the day, they managed to eke out a small profit, but at this point, when you have sales like they were in August, where a lot of the shops aren't ordering the books, you're reaching a point where you're being forced to make a tough decision. And the tough decision that Warner Brothers and Disney may be forced to make is to shut down their publishing division. And they have a good reason to shut down their publishing division, because the median age for an average comic book reader is 40 years old. And at that age, that's the age many corporations believe it's okay to start discontinuing products, because once your median age for your customer is 40 years old, that means the product has no other place to grow as related to the customer. Because once your customer hits the age of 40 years old, there's no place for them to go but the grave. And unless you have new, younger customers coming in to buy that product, then that company is just going to lose money continuing to invest in an audience that grows smaller and smaller over the next couple of years. And when I look at the numbers for August 2017, they're showing me that the audience for comic books has shrunk to the smallest level possible. I mean, the audience for 32-page comic books looks like it's getting ready to shrink to the level where Oldsmobile was back in the early 2000s, where Oldsmobile, which was a company that once sold 1 million Cutlass Supremes in the 1970s, by 2001 wasn't able to sustain itself. And the same thing happened to Pontiac in 2008. Once a very popular company in the 70s, with cars like the Pontiac Firebird and the Trans Am, reached a point where there was no customers to go buy that product. And the same thing happened again with the Nabisco products like Royal Lunch Milk Crackers and Crown Pilot Crackers, where the median age hit the age of 60, And once a product hits those median ages, that's where the company says it's just time to discontinue it because the customer is just not going to be there to buy it. Now I look at the Marvel comics and DC comics, and we're headed towards that road because of all the mismanagement with those brands and no real serious campaign to bring in younger customers. Yes, younger customers were brought in for TV shows and movies and stuff like that, but for print comics, there hasn't been a real serious campaign to bring in those younger customers. And it's hard to imagine a world without these superheroes gracing the page with 32-page comic. But again, we're getting there, and the world is going to be a lot sadder place without comic books. It's sad to think that kids are going to grow up without comic books, but that's where we're headed right about now because comic shops are the only place you can buy comics, and we're reaching a point where the comic shops now just can't afford to continue ordering comics because they're taking losses on them, and some have taken up so many losses that they're going out of business. Now, I couldn't imagine a world without comics back in the 1980s because I grew up with Marvel and DC comic books. They were how I learned to read when I was 4 years old, and they got me through a lot of hard times in junior high, high school, and college. I mean, I used to look forward to my getting comics on Fridays when I was in Times Square, when I used to go to Park West High School, and I used to look forward to getting them on Saturdays when I was in Fordham Road when I was in Taft High School, and when I was going to college on Wednesdays. I used to buy comics on the regular, and they were a major part of my life. I mean, I would look forward to go buying these comics, but it just saddens me that you have a generation of kids that will never grow up to know what a comic book is or experience a comic book, and that's all due to all of this mismanagement and the decline of the comic book industry over the last 20 years. And when I think about that, the world is going to be a lot sadder place without your Marvel comics or your DC comics on the comic book rack, because comic books were the thing that can inspire kids to imagine themselves as somebody that in the future, or inspire them or give them hope to get through hard times. Because when I was growing up in the South Bronx, comics helped me get through a lot of hard days and helped me get through a lot of difficult periods. It was comic books. They helped me deal with a lot of different things, and it would be sad that kids wouldn't have, comics like I had, or have access to comic books or the comic book medium. Because when it comes down to comic books, a 32-page comic wasn't a place for kids to have a place to escape the real world for a little while and then help them deal with reality, or give them someone that they could relate to and identify with and see their problems going on in life. And for some kids, it helped them have something to aspire to when they grew up. And when I think about a world without comics, again, it would be a very sad place, because it's a place where there wouldn't be much imagination or much creativity, because comic characters do inspire kids. They do give them someone to relate to. They do give them someone to identify with. They give them someone to see their experiences and experience the world through, or see the world through from a different perspective. And the world would be a lot sadder place without comic books in it. And the sad part is, we're reaching that point where these businesses, Disney and Warner Brothers, just can't sustain comic books anymore, and they can't sustain publishing and printing comics. And that's going to be that's what's really going to be sad for the next generation. They're going to be growing up, sadly, that possibly in a world where there are no 32-page comic books, there are no real superheroes, and there's no place for them to see that they can use their imagination towards creating a better future for themselves. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct Universe titles like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, and the Temptation of John Haynes, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.